Ganji here have been just marvelous in arranging things for us. I also want to thank some other people. I think you should know that these events, it's a series of 6 Saturdays, plus a number of evening and outer island events, are underwritten principally by the Hawaii Committee for the Humanities. Now, the Hawaii Committee for the Humanities, they get their source of revenue from the National Endowment for the Humanities. George Tanabe, actually, you know, he used to be the state, what did you call yourself? Oh, Emperor of what? Of the Hawaii Committee for Humanities, something like that. Volunteer position. No, he just did it out of the goodness of his heart, but this, we hope this funding in Washington continues for National Endowment for the Humanities, because this is the kind of event where the university and the community and different organizations collaborate that was really only made possible by their support. In addition, you've probably seen the community blanketed with publicity, and that's the responsibility of the UH summer session. Is Victor Kobayashi here somewhere? He's everywhere. Victor, please. Incredible job. And you see the layout on this humanities guide, Living and Dying in Buddhist Culture. Victor's artistic sense brought together people to really do a beautiful job for that. In addition, of course, the Buddhist Studies program at the University of Hawaii has been this source and the home for a lot of the work, and Lekshe has really been the organizer, carried on her shoulders. The weight became so great yesterday that her car broke down. So here she was barreling to the airport to pick up some of our speakers, and so you can see the burden that she's been carrying. As part of the summer session, we have for a number, I think almost 35 or 40 people, we have this program available for course credit. Of course, you have to do homework as part of that. And so for those of you who are in the class, it's called Asian Studies 491B. Again, we will meet at lunchtime for 30 minutes. We're going to meet in the headquarters conference room. So it's actually out this door to your left, and you wind out, you go out that door, and then you turn left, and you circle around behind, and there's a conference room. And so after you get your lunch, if you could please bring your lunch with you, and we will meet in that room and go over our homework, I guess, while we eat lunch. That's kind of not a very appetizing thought for some of you, perhaps. But anyway, that's what we'll do. So it's important that you all have lunch tickets so that you can have a bento box with you for your lunch. And if any of you are in the class and do not yet have your lunch tickets, where are the lunch tickets at the back? Could somebody put up their hand? There's where the lunch tickets can be had at the back. Now it's my great honor and delight to introduce the moderator for this morning. The Hawaii Committee for Humanities endeavors to bring humanities scholars together with the community to see how common issues can be illuminated. And our illuminator this morning, we have 2 illuminators, humanities scholars, and I'll introduce first Roger Ames. He's the director for the Center for Chinese Studies at the University campus. He also is editor of the journal Philosophy East and West. I think the philosophy department is the leading department in the world for comparative philosophy, based upon this long tradition of East-West philosophy. And Roger is really a leading figure in keeping that stature of the department alive. Roger also, I should mention, in this Buddhist temple, a scene of peace. I think his latest book dealt with what? Warfare. So if any of you are interested in ancient Chinese strategies of warfare, you can find out Roger's written many books. He and David Hall are have also collaborated on a series that's the leading series on Taoist studies nationally. And it gives me great pleasure, as I think not only Buddhist culture, he and I are also, I should warn you, are Canadians. So he may talk about living and dying in Canadian culture, right? But Roger, the mic is yours.
Thank you, David. I want to congratulate the organizers of today's event for their inclusivity. They've included Canadians, they've included a self-confessed Confucian, and this kind of tolerance is entirely consistent with the Buddhist tradition, of course. I have a housekeeping responsibility, and that is that I'm supposed to remind you that it would be a very good thing if you could buy your lunch tickets for next week during the break. So far, so good. I've been asked to be moderator today, which suggests that there might be some immoderation, and perhaps that's the connection with warfare. It's my great pleasure today to introduce my friend and colleague, Professor George Tanabe, who is the chairman of the Religion Department at the University of Hawaii. George has studied extensively in Japan at Todai and took his PhD from Columbia University. He's authored a considerable amount of research on Buddhism, working on the Lotus Sutra, and his most recent book with Harvard University Press is Mioe, the Dream Keeper. He's going to speak to us today on Japanese pre-death rituals. George?
Thank you, Roger. Yes, I'd also like to add my congratulations to the organizers of the entire project. It has many different facets to it, obviously very elaborate, but as we can see from the turnout today, I think it obviously has a great appeal and fills a certain need in the community, and I hope that I will be able to do my part in order to help to say something of use and give some illumination to this very interesting and important topic of living and dying. I don't know how much bigger a topic we can pick, you know, it covers everything, living and dying. I chose for my task to talk about pre-death rituals. There will be many other people who will be talking about funerals and talking about ideas of the afterlife. And so if we draw a line and we put an intersection at the middle of the line and say that's the point of death, much of what we'll be talking about in this entire project, will be at that point and beyond the other side, which is the side having to do with the many beliefs and ideas about what happens to us after we die. I thought I would start off by talking about some of the rituals and some of the ideas and some of the rationales that have to do with the part before the point of death. And so I have titled my talk Pre-Death Rituals. I'd like to also give my standard reminder that there is no such thing as Buddhism, that there is no such thing as Japanese culture, that there are only many, many different types of Buddhisms, and that there are many different patterns of Japanese culture. And therefore, what I describe is not to be understood as being somehow representative of all of Buddhism or all of Japanese culture. And in fact, some of what I describe will be very exceptional. You know, it won't be the rule at all. It will be the exception to the rule. And yet, I think there is some value at looking at some of these very small expressions of the larger Buddhist tradition, because I think we might be able to address some issues by looking at some of these smaller expressions of ideas and actions of how it is that we go about facing our deaths. Let me take the broadest view, however, and look at ritual in terms of just proper action, proper deportment, something that we as Americans and maybe even Canadians also are not too big on. You know, we're not too big on rituals. I remember Momi Kazimaro, one of the Board of Regents and members of the University of Hawaii, saying that, you know, one of the problems with the universities, we don't have any rituals, you know, and it's true. We have very few rituals, and as Americans, we basically are anti-ritual. We're very uncomfortable with ritual. We'd much rather just get right down to business. If anything, we prefer going around proper deportment and proper procedure. That's more our style. But if we take ritual to mean, in the broadest sense of the term, proper deportment, you know, correct action, following the rules, and rituals are always defined by rules, then we can take a look at the most generalized area of what might be called pre-death rituals, and that's just the whole area of right action, proper deportment, good etiquette. And all of this ties in, of course, with the idea of karma, namely that as you do good, you build up a certain merit. As you do bad, that fund of merit gets depleted. And all of this has to do with what's going to happen to you in your next life. Again, another idea that is very important to Buddhism, the idea that after you die, there is another life, and that following, succeeding life is affected by the quality of the life that you live before you die. And so I mentioned this very obvious part of Buddhist living because I think it fits in with pre-death ritual if we understand ritual in the broadest sense of right action and good conduct. I'd like to look, though, really, and spend most of my time at several examples of the more specific, narrow sense of the word rituals. Certain kinds of activity that is conducted for very specific purposes. And the first kind of pre-death ritual I'd like to look at is what we might call ritual suicide. Now, suicide is a difficult matter, and it is one that is very controversial. Obviously, it is not something that is easy to embrace. Obviously, it is not something that can be said to be a good thing. For the most part, I think that we think that suicide is wrong, suicide is bad. Most of the time, suicide is carried out in a state of great depression or great anxiety, not a very good frame of mind we find ourselves in when we contemplate the possibility of suicide. But I'd like to look at some rare examples of Buddhist ritual suicide in which that kind of mentality is not operating. In other words, there's no depression here. There is no deep anxiety here. There is no great sorrow or sadness here. That there is a very clear justification and a very clear acceptance of suicide as not being bad or wrong, but as being something that is good. So good that we can willingly commit suicide, deliberately commit suicide, and feel very good about it because it is something good to do. There are very few cases, and again, let me warn you, I'm not talking about a major pattern here. There are very few cases of ritual suicide, but we do have cases of ritual suicide in Japan, mostly in the medieval period. In the 12th century, a monk rode out into the middle of Lake Biwa, close to Kyoto, and recited the Nembutsu, faced west because that is the direction of the Pure Land of Amida, and then drowned himself in the middle of the lake. And he told his supporters that if his body were to show up on the western shore, that means he would have made it to the Pure Land. If his body floated and showed up on the eastern shore, it meant he would have fallen into hell. And as the story goes, of course, he wound up, his body was found on the western shore, and so his supporters were happy that he was able to reach the Pure Land. Now there's a scriptural basis for ritual suicide, and it is in the Lotus Sutra. It is in the story about how it is that a bodhisattva drank perfumed oil and ate incense for 1,200 years, and then set himself on fire. And the Buddha, seeing this self-immolation take place before his eyes, said, "Excellent, excellent, good man." The fire burned for another 1,200 years, and here then we have a story of mythic proportion, but a story nevertheless of a ritual suicide which had the full blessing of the Buddha himself, as it is presented in this sutra. And so with this scriptural basis, there has been a justification. There has been a way in which Buddhists who have decided to end their lives have been able to refer back to a sutra itself, to a sacred scripture itself, and be confident that there was not anything wrong with this act, and that it was perfectly allowable and even desirable. After all, if you have lived a good life, if you have a good fund of merit, and if the next life promises to be in a place called the Pure Land, the paradise, unlike the world as it is, which is not a paradise, then that is something to look forward to, that is something to enter, a place to go to sooner rather than later, deliberately rather than accidentally. So I raise this again, and there are other kinds of examples of ritual suicide. There's the example of the monk Sinon, who threw himself into the water, but the water was not deep enough, and so he didn't drown. He failed, and so he dug himself a hole and had himself buried in the hole, and died that way, committed suicide in that fashion. Now again, I raise this point because I think we are talking about, even though we're talking about a very rare occurrence in Buddhist Japan, we are talking obviously about an issue that is of great concern to us at this time, namely the whole issue of euthanasia, the whole issue of assisted suicide. And we have cases, as you all know, of people who have wanted to die in order mostly to end the misery of their illness. But it has become a great moral and legal problem, and a spiritual problem as well. And I cite these cases of ritual suicide only to remind us that in the complex tradition that we are looking at, there are pockets of justifications, pockets of thinking in which suicide is seen not as something bad, but something good. The second ritual that I would like to call your attention to is the rituals having to do with this idea of daigo. Dai means to come, and go is to welcome. And it refers to the belief that at the point of death, Amida, Buddha, will come, Dai, will come to you and welcome you, and take you back, accompany you back into the Pure Land. And this is a promise that Amida made, the 19th vow of the 48 vows that Amida has made. And it is something that Buddhists have often turned to as a source of comfort and as a source of assurance as they face the moment of their death. And so the ritual involves reciting the Nembutsu, it involves thinking about the Buddha, it involves having the right thought. And we might look at this as being part of the psychology of the last moment. What was the state of your mind at that last moment of death? And we feel, I think, all of us feel very, very much so that that moment is an important moment. And this is why, if we know of people who have died a violent death or who have committed suicide, this is one of the problems with suicide, that they must have been depressed, they must have been distraught. How awful it must be to have as your last moment a moment of distress and a moment of depression or a moment of violent death. And it's very disturbing. You know, there's somehow something that is incomplete yet. There is no closure to that death yet. There is no finality that has, even though the death is most certainly final, but in a psychological, emotional sense, there is no way in which the case has been closed properly. And if only there could have been for that person a last moment in which there was assurance, in which there was comfort, in which there was peace of mind. And so the rituals having to do with Raigo are focused upon bringing about this kind of mentality of the last moment, a mindset in which there is assurance, there is comfort, there is peace of mind. And so with that belief that Amida will come down, and scrolls were painted of Amida coming down over the mountains with a retinue of other bodhisattvas and attendants. And these pictures were placed by the bedside of the person who was about to die. And the person who is about to die would be able to look out and feel assured, feel a comfort that Amida would indeed come and accompany that person back to the Pure Land. There are even cases in which a string was tied from the scroll to so that the person could hold on to the other end, thereby symbolizing a very direct connection. My colleague Helen Baroni will talk about ties that bind, and here is a very literal example of a kind of a tie that binds oneself, in this case binds oneself to Amida, and to be able to be drawn, therefore, pulled into the Pure Land. So this is another pre-death ritual in which the important point is assurance and peace of mind instead of fear and despair, the normal kinds of feelings that we associate with death. Thirdly, I'd like to call your attention to a rather new development, actually, in Japanese Buddhist practice. New development is specifically speaking, but actually the idea itself relates to a lot of what we are talking about in terms of assurance and peace of mind. I call your attention to the development of what are known as pokkuri rituals. And we have one of the experts on pokkuri rituals here, Fuki Ikeuchi, who is a student in our department. She has published an article on this, and I acknowledge her because I have learned much from her article, and what I have to tell you is mostly stolen from her work. These pokkuri, what does pokkuri mean? Pokkuri means, quick, a snap, like when you break a branch or something, pokkuri, it's the sound of the word itself, carries a lot of the meaning. And it has to do with the great hope, or I think really a universal hope. You don't have to be a Japanese Buddhist to hope for this, but it's the great hope that when we die, we will pokkuri die. Die quickly. Not die lying in a hospital bed for years and years, not have a prolonged illness, as is the case with so many people whom we know, and many of you, I'm sure, are even providing care for some of these people who are really, there is no hope for recovery or cure, and it's very expensive, it's very painful, and very difficult to die in this fashion. And this fashion of dying, that is slow, prolonged, in a hospital bed, has been a creation of modern medicine. And with modern medical technology, it's able to prolong our lives in this fashion. And therefore, the pokkuri rituals have become a matter of more recent, it's a much more modern kind of a ritual in response to the modern developments of medical technology, which allow us to live for much longer, even though we're not really going to get any better. And so there are temples now, pokkuri temples, to which mostly elderly Japanese go, and they pray for a quick and painless death. They pray that they will not be caught in some kind of protracted illness that will last over a long, long time. And this too is related to that old idea of being able to go in a good frame of mind rather than in a frame of mind which is going to be conditioned by prolonged illness. Now, the difference between Pokuri rituals and ritual suicide, of course, is that there is no artificially induced death involved with Pokuri. This is not ritual suicide. This is not, engaging in some kind of action to take your own life, although that most certainly is one way to go quickly. And we now have technology to do it painlessly, although the doctor who provides it is in trouble legally. But it is possible to go pokuri, through ritual suicide. But the rituals I'm talking about do not involve suicide in any fashion. This is a prayer for a natural death, a natural quick death and painless death. And these rituals are becoming popular in Japan, again, as it becomes more and more possible for us to prolong our lives, even though we are ill and cannot be cured. And so here, the ideal is for a quick and painless and dignified death, and all of this kind of hope has taken expression in a ritual, in a pre-death ritual, in which you can go and buy an amulet or to have prayers said for this kind of a natural and painless death. There is the last pre-death ritual that I'd like to talk about is called gyakushu. Gyaku means reverse and shu means practice, and so literally it means a reverse practice. And here I have to confess that I stole all this material from my wife's book. And you actually had the wrong speaker, you should have had her, because she has done work on Raigo and Gyakushu and so on. But at any rate, Gyakushu is a really interesting kind of a ritual, very ancient ritual. The first case is in the 9th century in Japan, and there's actually a kind of a small revival of Gyakushu going on in Japan now. Now what is Gyakushu? What is this reverse ritual? Gyakushu are funerals that you perform for yourself before you die. Now think of that. That's an interesting idea. It's an interesting kind of a ritual to have, before you die, to have your funeral. My father is a funeral connoisseur. I was going to say junkie, but he's a funeral connoisseur. He reads the obituaries regularly, and he goes to everybody's funeral. And when he comes back, I'll ask him. I'll say, "Oh, how was the funeral?" He said, "Oh, not so good." Or he would say, "Oh, it was a really good one." He's a real connoisseur of funerals. And we've often said in the family that it's going to be too bad that when Papa dies, he's not going to be at his own funeral. It's going to be a big one because it goes to everybody else's. And he's kind of well known in the community, and it's going to be too bad that Papa is going to miss his own funeral. Think of it. What a ritual to miss in your life. The one time in your life when people will get up and say, "He was a great man." You won't be there to hear it. You're dead. And so Gyakushu, what a brilliant idea. Maybe I ought to have one for my father. Gyakushu, and I'm interested to hear from any of you. Reverend Muneto and I spoke yesterday, and we were kind of wondering whether there were examples of Gyakushu in Hawaii, and we couldn't think of any example. But some of you might remember. Scott Matsumoto is here. He certainly remembers about the about a year ago, maybe a year or two ago, Gyakushu pre-death funeral that was held by a kind of of rituals. But here again, it's an interesting kind of activity to put on. My wife translates gyakushu as preemptive funeral. And what she means by preemptive is that there are certain conditions which might prevent the proper putting on of a funeral. And in order to preempt those threats or those obstacles, possible obstacles to a proper funeral, you make sure that you have a proper funeral by doing it yourself. Some of the old examples go back to, the first example is by a man, we even have his name, Abe Sadayuki. And he held a service, really it was for someone in the family, but he also included himself in that funeral because he was afraid that when he died, his descendants would not be able to afford a funeral. Funerals can be expensive. They were in those days, they still are or can be. And he was afraid that maybe his family would not be able to afford a proper funeral, and so he had one for himself to make sure, to guarantee that a proper funeral was carried out. In the 10th century, the monk Chonen was about to embark on a trip to China, as monks often or sometimes did go to China. And in the 10th century, this is a very difficult trip. Many did not come back, going on this tiny little boat across the ocean and traveling on foot and so on. It's a dangerous prospect to go on a trip from Japan to China in the 10th century. And he was realistic about it all and thought that maybe he would not return from his trip to China. And if he did not return, if somehow he died on his trip to China, then who would, he was the only son, only child, who would put on a funeral for his mother? And so before he went to China, he conducted her funeral. Now you might think of that as a little bit morbid, Mom, we're having your funeral tomorrow. Could you come? Could you lie in the coffin? And people come by and say, what a great woman she was. It may sound kind of morbid, but again, the sentiment behind it is, it's so important. We must have proper closure. And there are possibilities, many possibilities, for a proper closure or proper funeral not to be carried out. And so in order to avoid that, you can guarantee that in some fashion the funeral would be carried out, and so you do it before your own death. In the Tale of Genji, the famous classic Japanese novel, there are many cases of gyakushu. And Lady Murasaki, one of the principal characters in the novel, has, in fact, a whole chapter of the Tale of Genji is dedicated to the description of a pre-death funeral that Murasaki had for herself. Very elaborate. She secretly planned it for several years. She had 1,000 copies of the Lotus Sutra copied to be dedicated at her funeral. And all kinds of different priests were contacted, and they were going to chant, and they were going to give sermons. And there was even a kind of a dramatic performance that she had planned, a dramatic reenactment of a story in the Lotus Sutra. And so the day finally came, and she is ill now. She is facing her own death. And I might point out that all of these rituals that I'm talking about, even though they can be performed for other people, your mother, your father, and so forth, most of these, we're talking about rituals that have to do with your own death. And so now, as Murasaki is facing her own death, she has this gyakushu put on, and it's greatly elaborate. It is immensely successful. People are just awed. They're overwhelmed by the beauty of it all, by the pageantry of it all, by the expense of it all. It's extremely elaborate kind of ritual. And Murasaki is quite pleased. It's been a success. And the novel, The Tale of Genji, describes the important point at which Murasaki makes her evaluation of this event. One would have thought that the possibilities of beauty were exhausted. But the occasion brought yet higher access of beauty. Looking out upon all this joy and beauty, Murasaki thought, how little time I have left. And here we have the coming together, as one of my other students, Jane Friedman, has pointed out, the sense of awari, or the sense of the sensitivity to beauty, tied into the Buddhist idea of mujo, or impermanence. And so at the time, and quite literally, Murasaki is facing the impermanence of her life, how little time she has left. It's all passing. It's going to be gone very, very soon. You know, what's most important for her is to feel this beauty, the joy and the beauty. You know, we had thought that we had reached the apex of beauty by the season and by the occasion, and yet now there is an even higher access to beauty. And so it's extremely important sentiment, and this is what I'd like to point out as an important part of the Gyakushu ritual, that there is here joy and beauty in the facing of our deaths, and this can be seen in this pre-death ritual. Let me just summarize my points here, and let me also go back a bit and point out about the Raigo, since we are in a Honganji temple, and Reverend Muneto yesterday kindly corrected something that I had said to him in a summary of my talk. And that is that, as many of you know, Shinran did not think that Raigo beliefs or rituals were necessary. He did not think that you need to have this special kind of ritual at the moment of your death, looking at the picture of Amida coming down to greet you and so on. Because in his view, the moment of faith, you know, the moment at which you affirm the power of Amida, you affirm that Amida's power has saved you, and that moment of faith is the moment of assurance. And that you don't have to wait, in other words, until, you know, the end of your life to be assured that you're going to be taken into the Pure Land. There is a kind of an anxiety there, you know, holding on to the string tied to the scroll. Is that what, you worry? Maybe you won't go? You know, hanging on to the string. And in Shinran's view, you don't have to worry if you have that sufficient faith in which you are assured already, you know, in a way throughout your life up to the moment of death, that you will go to the Pure Land by the grace of Amida's power. And so there is this kind of way in which, you know, Shinran did not see the necessity for Daigo rituals. But the point is still the same. Whether you accept or don't accept Daigo rituals, the point is still the same, assurance. And if the assurance can come through a deathbed ritual and the hanging of a scroll, then do that. Because the important point is that there be some peace of mind, some composure, some assurance that the moment of death is not going to bring about some impending disaster. Or if that assurance can be acquired through an affirmation of faith, then that too is fine. The common point for all of the Daigo beliefs, including the rejection of the Daigo belief, is this matter of assurance or peace of mind. And so we have then pre-death rituals as alternatives to the more normal kind of fear and despair and sadness, even perhaps, that we normally associate with death. We can have a willing, deliberate, welcoming taking of life through ritual suicide. We can have assurance, peace of mind through Daigo rituals or through an affirmation of faith. We can hope for a quick and painless death through Pokkuri rituals, or we can feel, difficult as it is, we can feel joy and beauty in the celebrating of one's own funeral. Now, I've pointed out that many of these rituals have to do with one's own death, and if I have portrayed these rituals as being somehow positive, accentuating the side of joy and beauty and assurance and comfort and willingness to die, it is because it is easier, I think, to have this positive mentality about one's own death, and much more difficult, of course, when we are looking at the death of someone else, especially someone close to us. It's much more difficult to feel positive about the death of your child or your parent or someone like that. And yet still, though, I think what these pre-death rituals tell us is that even if we don't replace the sadness of death, and maybe even if we don't replace the fear of death, that there can be at the same time, or that there can be in the sadness, or maybe even in that fear, that there can be something of assurance and comfort and joy and beauty, which, and this is what rituals are for, which can be generated, which can be made through these rituals. And that, I think, is the importance and the value of rituals, is that they have specific purposes, and that if the ritual succeeds, then there can be, even if we don't replace the fear and the foreboding of death, there can be, as Murasaki said, joy and beauty even in the sadness. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Tanabe. Lots of ideas to work with here. I'm sure that there are people out there who are already planning their gyakushu. Oh, very nice. Thank you. A very important ritual of our own. Our respondent before the open discussion this morning is Reverend Tatsuo Muneto of Hongwanji Betsui. Reverend Muneto.
Good morning. My name is Tatsuo Muneto. I'm the Assistant Chief Minister of this temple. Sometimes I'm a officiant of funeral, weddings. I'm an office manager sometimes, custodian, security chief, and so forth. I'm very happy to see so many of you for this very, very important symposium on living and dying in Japanese Buddhist culture. I really enjoyed Dr. Tanabe's presentation. I like to respond to him for his major sections of his presentation. As you may know, in medieval Japan, some Buddhists and followers of the Buddha committed suicide to make their birth in Buddha land of peace, taking place early. And this idea is sometimes discussed today because we talk about euthanasia and the suicide. And, as a Buddhist minister, when I am asked if it's this kind of man's behavior is accepted, my response is no. What is important is not to attain birth in Buddha's land of peace, but to continue to live, fulfilling one's purpose in life, personal purpose of life. And we have various kinds of responsibilities in this mundane world. Therefore, I do not accept this idea of making moment of death early. I think death must be natural. That's my stance as a Jodo Shin Buddhist minister. However, we have a few funerals a year for those who have committed suicide. When I go to funeral, I have so much sympathy and love to the family, and when I know the background of those who committed suicide, although I do not agree with what they did, I respect the person's circumstance, his or her legacy, and somehow funeral service become beautiful and impressive. So that's my response to Dr. Tanabe. I think this will be one of the issues from now on in death and dying in Buddhist culture. The concept of Buddha's coming to welcome a devotee of Nembutsu follower. Dr. Tanabe said Shinran, the founder of Jodo Shin Buddhism, rejected, but it was not Shinran, but that was Honen, the founder of Jodo sect, who was the founder of Pure Land Buddhism in 11th century Japan. The reason why he rejected the concept of Buddha coming to welcome a devotee was because he emphasized the mindfulness, right mindfulness. So he didn't think that rituals in terms of lying down in the room with Amida statue or image and having a beautiful flower arrangement and incense, coming up. Rituals are not held for the sake of psychological peace and comfort and security. Okay. Honen maintained that the Amida Buddha's coming to welcome a devotee is a necessity. Those who daily live life in recitation of Nembutsu, Nammandabutsu in deep appreciation to the primal vow of Amida Buddha. By living daily in saying Nembutsu, coming of Buddha to one's deathbed is a necessity. That's what happens. So it's not we have rituals for the sake of peace and peace of mind and comfort and so forth, I believe. If you read a book on this death ritual, deathbed ritual, it's very beautiful and very much impressed. And if you read, you may say, oh, that's what we need in Hawaii today. But you'll have to pay plenty of money. We'll have Buddhist priests coming with beautiful robes. Yeah, I think some of you are thinking about, hey, that's what we need. Yeah, that's what we need. But I think we still have to respect local Buddhist practice, okay? Local Buddhist practice. And what is very important, I believe, is continue to learn the Dharma at home, at church, with friends. Then we maintain this, what you call, the awareness of being one with Amida Buddha's love and compassion. Then I think, we can face death with courage, hope, and to die and to go to Pure Land is not the ultimate goal of Buddhist life. We still come back to share the Dharma with others according to Shinran's notion of birth. Pokuri-dera. There is a temple called Pokuri-dera in Nara, I believe. According to a few articles, if you go there, you're really impressed by the peace surrounding the temple compound. People look so happy They look so, helpful. They support you. So those who go to the temple are not ill, yet. They are still working as a retiree. They have children, they have grandchildren to take care of, but they go to Bokuri Dera just to assure when they go, they would be able to go quickly, pokuri, pokuri. In Jodo mission, that may be respected, but in Jodo Shin Buddhism, we do not take that very practical. Yeah. There are few kinds of going. Joko means so much concerned about how the family members were able to go. They say, Sensei, I'm glad because my grandma was able to go so peacefully. As a human being, I think that's natural, but in Shinran's teaching, it doesn't matter how one goes, one goes. In one text called Anjin Ketsujosho, there are a few kinds of birth. We maybe kick our legs like this, It's okay, Shinran says. In our Jodo Shin practice, it's okay. And anxiety, that's okay. Going like this is still accepted because so far as there is a deep faith in that individual, no matter how one goes, depends upon that person's karma that he or she accumulated for the past many years. Okay, now, Buddhism in Hawaii has been here for 100 years, and as far as Buddhist history goes, I think we have so much emphasized death rituals, and gradually the practices are being faded for a few reasons. I think that's due to the Americanization of Hawaii as a whole. Issei people respected death rituals, and they invited ministers a few days before they died, and the families informed the temple early enough so that ministers were able to go to talk to the patients. But this trend is being faded. It's going away gradually. So Buddhist ministers are encouraging the families to inform the temple ministers so that ministers are able to provide spiritual counseling. I think counseling is very important. Then rituals such as makuragyo and funerals start to really make sense. However, no notion of having Buddha coming to welcome a devotee wouldn't be necessary. Okay. Again, emphasis must be hearing the Dharma, studying the Dharma here now, share our understanding with families and friends. Then I think we can cope with death and dying more peacefully and practically. In concluding, I have a few old-time members of this temple who wouldn't need Amita Buddha coming to welcome her. They don't have any notion of asking Amita to come and take them to Buddha land of peace. Both of them are Issei, first generation Japanese, and they came to the temple for so many years, so they have very genuine understanding of Amita's compassion and working of the Dharma. So when I saw one lady in November, she knew that she wouldn't make it too long, and she wouldn't be able to come to the temple too often anymore. So she just wanted to say hello. And because I knew that I wouldn't be able to see her oftentimes, in appreciation of the Nembutsu teaching primarily, to come to understand the compassionate Amida, compassionate heart of Amida, which is always present in us. I chanted Jusege in her bedroom, and that was end of November. And in December, she had pneumonia, and grandchildren came back from mainland. This lady was suffering because of poor eyesight and hard hearing. However, she still is on. She is at the convalescent center of Honolulu. And when death comes, when she passes away, in the event of her death, the family will inform me of her death, and minister will go for bedside service. Now, this bedside service is not held with the notion of asking Amida to come to take her. It will be held as a sort of affirmation of faith of the family, including myself. And chanting will be done, and there will be some kind of reading, and there will be a Dharma talk, and the funeral service will be held in a few days after that. So that's what I want to see in the Buddhism in Hawaii. But we are facing more unnatural death, unnatural type of death, so we have to cope with more skills, and that's why we are trying to have a project on a program so that we can able to support the temple community, Buddhist community, from different angles. Anyway, let me finish my response over here. Thank you so much.
We have about 15 minutes for discussion, and I'm sure that there are lots of questions that we can direct to our two experts. The floor is open.
I know that the Catholic have the idea that when you commit suicide, you go to kind of purgatory instead of going to heaven. I would like to know whether there is such a notion in Buddhism.
Yeah, if by purgatory you mean someplace sort of, on the way to hell, kind of a stopping station on the way to hell, then I think in the Buddhist view of the 6 realms of transmigration, or the 6 paths of transmigration, that there isn't such a kind of a midway point. As was the case with the monk who drowned himself in Lake Biwa. If he showed up in the western shore, he would be in paradise. If he showed up in the eastern shore, he would have wound up in hell. So maybe not a purgatory, but straight to hell, direct path to hell. And that raises, though, the possibility that suicide, or any other kind of death for that matter, can result in one being in hell rather than in paradise. Again, according to some Buddhist beliefs, certainly not all Buddhist beliefs.
Reverend Muneta, did you have anything that you wanted to add? This lady?
My question doesn't deal with pre-death ritual, but I was curious to know why it seems to be in Buddhism that there's cremation as a way of disposing of the body, as opposed response to other ways?
Why in Buddhism is there cremation as a way of disposing of the body?
In Buddhist tradition, there are various forms of what you say, disposal. In India, first of all, it's hot, and air is very hot. So I don't think it was practical to leave the dead body for a couple of days. But as you may know, in India, the dead bodies are taken to Ganges river. They believe in reincarnation. They go back to water, and the body is cremated along the river of Ganges. Is it Ganges River? Yeah. I believe that's how cremation began in Asian practice. If you go to Tibet, birds come, and they eat flesh, but that's still taken. I'm sorry, I'm not too familiar with the Tibetan practice, but I heard there is a profound philosophy in that kind of burial. Another form of burial is the bodies are put on the tree. This is called wind cremation. Did I answer your question? No? Not quite. Wait, what do you want to ask?
I still don't quite understand the idea of cremation, why it's chosen. The fire, burning.
Could I just maybe add to what Reverend Moneto said? I think the one thing he did say was that there's a kind of a practical dimension to it, at least in a country like India, where it's very hot and you don't want to leave a body out, and it's expensive and complicated to preserve a body, particularly in a climate like that. So there's a practical reason for burning. It's sanitary and it's efficient. But I think there's another idea behind it, that is that fire is seen as purifying. Fire purifies. There are fire rituals. The use of fire in rituals is very commonplace. And in the case of how do you take care of a body, after all, it is a physical, putrid mass. And what do you do with it? And in addition to just a kind of physical sanitary considerations, there's a kind of a symbolic consideration whereby you can think of this as a purifying. And so when you have the ash there, now you have the essence or the refined, the purified remains of the body, and all of the other stuff is gone. So it's also thought of as a purifying process.
This lady down on the side. I think you have to turn on the mic.
What would you advise to people who wish to donate their organs after death?
There's a big debate going on in Japan at the moment, precisely over this question, because from the many Buddhist points of view, the moment of death, physical death, does not involve total death. After all, there still is this soul or spirit that is about to embark on another journey towards yet another life. And yet, organ transplants or organ donation requires immediate removal of the organs so that they don't deteriorate. And that presents a problem for a lot of Buddhists, because it's still a violation of the person. That the person is not just the totality of the body, that the person is a combination of body and spirit. And to somehow, to cut up and dissect the body is still to cut up and dissect the person as a whole. So, there is a big debate. On the other side, of course, there is the humanitarian side, and there are Buddhists who justify organ donation on the grounds of compassion, an equally important Buddhist value, that one should be compassionate, that the body, after all, is not that important. There are many, many ways in which Buddhists see the body as not being important, and therefore, organs can be donated. So there's a debate going on. It's a mixed, there are different positions on the issue. So I can't answer your question and say, yes, donate your organs, or no, don't. But I think it'd be helpful to see the reasons for the different sides of the debate. Those who say no, don't, refer to the spirit that is still there, that is still a part of the person. Those who say yes, do, justify it on the grounds of compassion.
This gentleman?
Yes, my question is directly to Reverend Moneto. You said you are in disagreement with the ritual death. I want to know if that's your personal position, or is that the position of the Hong Wanji here in Hawaii? Because in today's living world today, we have what you call, a lot of people are having living trust. What you call ritual suicide is a matter of semantics now with living trust. Living will, living will. And is it the position of the Hong Wanji that they don't believe? Are they in opposition to living wills?
Your question is in regard to the suicide, which will be justified or not?
Yes.
Is that your question? Not the deathbed ritual. Suicide. Suicide. Yeah. Yeah. What I said is based upon that's my view based upon my understanding of Buddha Dharma, not only Hong Wanji but also other Buddhist denominations' position. I think there are practical things to be considered, but when it comes to decision making, one really has to know if such an act of taking one's life is justified. In early Buddhism, to commit suicide is against 5 precepts, because the first of 5 precepts is not to take form of life. And in early Buddhism, it was also thought everybody, every being was able to attain enlightenment. So life is very precious. So when I think about early form of Buddhism, we can say it is not accepted that one takes his or her own life. It's very simple, I believe.
As moderator, I can step in here because I don't think that there is a contention there. My understanding of a living will is that it's to protect the naturalness of the death. That what you're doing is you're preventing the medical profession from taking extraordinary measures to keep you alive beyond the point at which you would die naturally. So it's not a matter, I don't think a living will would be a matter of suicide. It would be a matter of preserving the naturalness of a person's passing. This gentleman?
Locally, when it says the pre-death ritual to pray for a quick and painless death, up to what point does this begin to come into a person's life? First, we say painless. If a person is dying of cancer and they're in pain, they have to be injected with morphine. Is this ritual of Pokali, can that be already intimated at this point? And I don't quite understand how this would be determined, at what point would this ritual be prescribed?
Yes. Well, basically the idea is that, it's a general hope, and you're asking a kind of a detailed point here, but it's just a general hope for a quick and painless death. And it doesn't get into some of the details of, well, is morphine part of the painlessness, is that acceptable or not? It's just a general hope shared by everyone, fairly common kind of a hope that we all go and that we go naturally. And I think that was part of the living will point that Professor Ames made, that there be a natural death, that it could not be prolonged by artificial means, and that the quicker and the more painless, the better. And people who engage in the ritual don't take into consideration matters such as, well, is morphine justified or not, or anything like that. It's just a hope for a quick natural death.
This gentleman.
I've heard, I'm sorry, I forget your name, but you mentioned that a soul, after you die, your soul goes somewhere. But I have read text explaining Buddhist principles that state very clearly that there is no soul in a Buddhist philosophy that goes anywhere. So what specifically after a person dies? What is it that goes somewhere? Or is there anything that goes anywhere?
You're asking a classic Buddhist question. And the Buddha, in response to that question, said in one of the early texts, that is a question that tends not to edification. Just don't ask it. It's a dilemma. Who knows what goes? But as I pointed out, again, please don't forget my opening, my reminder. There are many different kinds of Buddhisms. In early Buddhist texts, you're quite right. There are those passages that say quite clearly there is no soul. I mean, that's one of the differences that early Buddhism, we can see the difference between early Buddhism and what we now call Hinduism, or Indian ideas of the Atman, that is the Brahman, that the soul is eternal and goes on forever, the kind of thing we read in the Bhagavad Gita. And the Buddha seems to have been making a distinction between that belief of an eternal soul and a soul which was not eternal, a soul that was caught in the constant process of change, as everything was caught in the constant process of change. So there's nothing eternal, there's nothing permanent, and that's why the question you ask is a really great dilemma, because there's something, but what is it? And there have been different attempts to say, well, it is kind of a life force, it's maybe memory, from a past life. There's one definition of the soul which defines it as that which eats incense. And so when you offer incense at the temple, you're feeding the soul. It's soul food. And so, it's defined as that, a dot. That's another definition, a very minuscule, tiny dot that feeds on, lives on incense. By the time Buddhism gets to China, Japan, though, the dilemma is basically resolved. I mean, nobody worries about what the Buddha said. Didn't he say there was no soul? Well, yes, but the affirmation by this time of an eternal soul is very, very strong. And all the ideas that we talked about are based upon the idea that there is a soul, that there is something, call it what you like, maybe soul is the wrong word, but whatever the word is, but there is something that is more than the body, and it has a life that exceeds the life of the body, in the past as well as into the future. So of the traditions that we're now talking about, say in Japan, it's not a point of question anymore. There is a soul, and therefore a lot of these beliefs and rituals that we talk about are based upon that idea.
Okay, soul.
I've been working with dying people for some 35 years, and I've had about 776 dying people with me. Among them, there's a comment I want to make on the Buddha coming to you. It's interesting that 80% of my patients have said that they have seen someone who died before them come to greet them before they die. This is a very common experience. It seems to me in the wisdom of Amida, she's so busy, so she sends messengers. And that's how Buddha comes to you.
These are we might say, cross-cultural rituals. So much of what we find in Buddhism in any country, including here in Hawaii, can be traced back to previous cultures as well. We've talked about some Indian ideas. These ideas of Daigo, for instance, coming, even though the practice did not really become popular in China, still the idea itself is to be found in Chinese Buddhism as well. So I think these are kind of cross-cultural ideas, and what I try to emphasize in terms of these pre-death rituals is the, you might say, universal human quality. The aspect in which we all want to die a quick and natural death. We all want to have a mind of assurance and peace as we die. All of these are maybe specific and kind of strange, unique rituals, but they have to them an element that can be shared by people in other cultures as well, which is why it's not hard for us here in Hawaii to be able to understand some of these rituals, because they appeal to something that we experience not as Americans or as Japanese or as Chinese, but as human beings.
Maybe I can say just something about the Chinese tradition. The expression for death in Chinese, siwa, has to do with remembering. To die in the Chinese tradition is to be forgotten. And where the Japanese notion of mujo is this idea of the celebration of impermanence, in the Chinese tradition, continuity is extraordinarily important. So there's a great focus in the Chinese tradition on keeping the memory of people alive as a way of keeping them alive. So I was in Macau. I visited a temple where the Chinese people there were burning money. We were all familiar with this, giving food and sustenance to the dead people. The idea of burying furniture and vessels to keep the people a part of everyday life, the things that they would use in eating and cleaning them, grooming themselves and so on. It was in this temple in Macau, they were burning these $10 million notes. And along with the $10 million notes, they were burning $1,000 notes. And so I asked them, why would you burn $1,000 notes? Why not burn lots and lots of $10,000 notes? And they looked at me rather curiously and they said, these people need to make change. in the Chinese tradition, enormously practical. And the job is to keep the people alive through ritual performance.
To ask a question of George Tanabe. It has to do with the first examples you gave, the first category of ritual suicides, where you gave examples of Buddhist priests committing suicide, say in Lake Biwa. I can understand your points that he's a Buddhist priest committing suicide, but I don't quite see what the ritual was. And I wanted to know if there were rituals performed that went along with the suicide, and what were they like?
Yeah, very brief kind of ritual. That priest chanted the Nembutsu and faced the west. So very brief kind of ritual. Another example of a nun who burned herself, a self-immolation, and here she had assistants help her with piling up of the firewood. and she chanted the passage in the Lotus Sutra, which I mentioned, which is the scriptural justification for this. So she chanted that passage as part of her ritual, specific ritual, in preparing to do what she was going to do, which was then to next get on that pile of firewood and burn herself. So very minimal. I mean, it wasn't elaborate, not prescribed in ritual manuals or anything. As I said, ritual suicide was fairly rare. It wasn't widespread. So people who did engage in the suicide did, I suppose, in effect, make up their own ritual. But I still consider this to be a ritual as opposed to just plain old suicide, which is suicide for very different reasons. This one has a specific rationale. There's even a text to which you can refer to, and there's a particular religious objective for this act. And in that sense, it's all prescribed. And in that sense, it's a ritual, as opposed to just taking your life because you can't stand it anymore.
I wonder if I could follow up very briefly. The ritual has a function, but you're ascribing an objective to it that may be different from its function. I think this was brought out in the Reverend's statement about Shinran. Namely, you can think of the ritual as affirming faith in existence or in death or whatever that might be, rather than having something lying outside of the ritual. In other words, the ritual performs what it signifies. And so when you start talking about objectives or purposes of the ritual, then we're getting into interpretation, which is done by Buddhists as well as non-Buddhists. And the Buddhists themselves may disagree as to what that interpretation is. And I'm curious, and in that sense you mean that there are many kinds of Buddhism, but it has to do with interpretation. But I sense that you're interpreting as though it has to have an outside objective. And I think that's where the difference lies between your viewpoints and the Reverend's.
Yeah, I'll let Reverend Moneto respond, but let me just say that I don't have any interpretation on this point. I'm reporting to you what the priest Sinan, or at least in the account about priest Sinan, maybe he himself didn't have that interpretation, but that account speaks of the objective of wanting to be reborn in the Pure Land, and that's his objective, or at least according to the account, not my interpretation of his objective.
After the medieval Japan, there was a reformation of Buddhism in 11th century Japan. And since after that, in many Buddhist denominations, rituals are taken as a kind of form in which followers of the Buddha can affirm the presence of the Buddha's compassion, except maybe some sects that emphasize discipline and the importance of precepts. But as far as Pure Land Buddhism, including Pure Land Shin Buddhism, the rituals are the opportunities for us to awaken to the presence of Amida Buddha. And the self is transformed. Defiled self is purely transformed into the self which is able to continue to share the Dharma with anybody around them. As Professor Aoki said, I think many people have vision of holy ones, but that's what the Honen says. One who is aware of the presence of the Buddha and respond to it in the saying of Nammanda Butsu, at the moment of death, sees Amida coming. So Honen, the founder of Joro Shu, maintained that no rituals for the sake of attain mindfulness. Okay? Buddha comes, therefore mindfulness is provided. And many followers of Honen were able to go in that deep awareness. So that's what as far as Pure Land system goes, that's what we are trying to attain. And that's what we are going to promote in this community.
We've come to the moment when this panel must pass on. and the next one will be reincarnated. Please join me in thanking Professor Tanabe and her
Over the course of years, the T cell system starts to get depleted, and as it gets depleted, those diseases that it's designed to protect us from start to take over the body, and someone dies. The average person has about 1,000 T cells at any moment in time, and we say over the course of the disease, you lose about 100 T cells a year, so that by about year 8 of the disease, after infection by the virus, you begin to develop diseases that we think of as AIDS. Now, AIDS comes about, and it's just, this is all language, but we say that somebody has AIDS when their T cells are under 200, or when they've gotten one of these diseases that we've come to define as AIDS-related, like pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, like Kaposi sarcoma, like CMV retinitis. Most of us in this room have some form of pneumocystis in our bodies. It doesn't hurt us. It doesn't hurt us because our own immune systems are wiping it out. They're controlling the situation. It does hurt somebody who's HIV infected, who has no T cells to take care of the problem. Since the AIDS epidemic began or was identified roughly 13 years ago, from my perspective anyway, the only real headway that medicine has made is in dealing with the specific, what are called opportunistic diseases that people get, like pneumocystis carinii pneumonia. We've gotten much more sophisticated in treating that problem than we were, let's say, when I was a medical student 8 years ago. When I was a medical student, if somebody got pneumocystis, we never put them in the intensive care unit. We never put them on ventilators. We didn't give them that option. And we didn't because our thinking, our common thinking, was that they wouldn't do well and that they'd die, so why bother? Why put them through that pain? And I'd like to read you a quote by an African bushman. "Love is ill, I go to the bush to fetch her medicine. I meet some fearful thing on the way. A bad spirit snatches the medicine from my hands. Truly, Mon, death gives no warning." When I was an intern, I'd been on call all night, and I decided to run in the Beta Breakers. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of this race, but it's a race from one side of San Francisco to the other. It's 7.7 miles. And I don't know why I decided to run the race, but I did. In any case, at about mile 2, there's this long hill that you have to climb up. And I was in a crowd of 80,000 people, and I wanted out in the worst way possible. But I was in the exact middle of the crowd with nowhere to go. And this really sweet man who was running beside me said, just breathe, come with me. And he escorted me through to the end of the race. 3 days later, I was on call again, and that same sweet man was in the emergency room, breathing really hard. He had pneumocystis carinii pneumonia. And he died exactly 1 week after he'd taken me through this race. Truly, Mon, death gives no warning. That wouldn't happen today. Last week, right before I got on the airplane, I admitted somebody to our unit who had had pneumocystis 4 times. He'd been on the ventilator 3 times, once for a month. And actually, after that episode, he'd gone back to his law practice. He practiced law for, I think, a year before getting sick again. People say of America, and I think it's true, that it's a culture that avoids death at all costs. We work with people who have a disease that spares absolutely no one, and we're working with the end stage of that disease. When I graduated from medical school, we took what now I think of as kind of a bizarre oath. It certainly touches on a lot of the issues that are being raised in this conference. But here are some of the words. Most especially must I tread with care in matters of life and death. If it is given to me to save a life, all thanks, but it may also be within my power to take a life. This awesome responsibility must be faced with great humbleness and awareness of my own frailty. Above all, I must not play at God. My partner and I have come to view the work that we do with people as helping them to turn a corner. We try to contain the ambiguity that's created by this virus. Is somebody living or are they dying? Where are they in their disease process? And by trying to provide a container for ambiguity, let them move and turn their own corner out of Western interventive medicine toward palliative care, if you will. We have a 23-bed unit that's in what's called a long-term nursing facility. I'm sure you have them here, kind of a chronic care facility. That facility is 1,200 beds, which makes it huge. It was set up, it's kind of an interesting background. It was set up as a home for the poor, primarily poor men at the turn of the century, and it's where everybody who was what would now be homeless was housed. And of course, pretty soon they developed medical problems, so a medical component came in, and ultimately it turned into a long care facility. When our ward was opened about 6 years ago, we were set up to take care of people who either couldn't go home because they were too sick, had no family to support them, needed some rehabilitation, and perhaps they were going to live longer, more productively. Perhaps they were going to be able to go home. But primarily we were set up for economic reasons, and that was to take the pressure off of the acute care beds at San Francisco General Hospital. San Francisco is really where AIDS care in the United States originated. At this point, most of our patients, let me see if I can, we've taken care of about 600 patients. They come in, the average length of stay is 20 days. It's a very short time. Of those people who come in, 70% die on the unit. But when they come to us, only 40% say, I'm coming here because I know that I've got nowhere else to go in life. 10% come to us wanting everything done, everything imaginable done. And we discharge about 20%. We discharge them home. The real problem is that we have no idea when somebody comes in. They're all end stage. They have no T cells. They've been sick with everything. But still, we have no idea where somebody fits. We may know that 20% are going to leave, but I don't know whether that means that you, Lekshay, are going to leave the hospital. I don't know who is actually going to be in that 20%. Because each patient or each client very much has his or her own trajectory, and that trajectory is caused by some of the complexity of the disease, by family, by will, by personality, and certainly by us. We're a factor in all of that. I'd like to talk briefly about one of my favorite people. Her name, and each patient obviously has a story, so I'm going to tell one story. Margaret was a really wonderful woman, mother of 4 children, about 40 years old, I think, when we first started taking care of her. She'd been an IV drug abuser. She had absolutely no idea about AIDS. She just had ended up in the hospital one day with a brain infection, and she was very thin, very confused, very ill. That same infection was also affecting her blood system. She couldn't clot blood. And the day, up until the time that she was sent to us, her family had wanted everything done. She'd been in the intensive care unit, I think, for 2 months. And then the day that she came to us, her medical team at San Francisco General said, you know, we've not been effective in getting her body to start making red blood cells. She's going to die. There's nothing that can be done. We're sending her to you for hospice care. Take good care of her. But nonetheless, here's a person sitting in front of me. And as I was admitting her, I was saying, and she was very lucid and walking around. She did only weigh 72 pounds when I admitted her. And I said, Margaret, what is it that you want done? And she said, oh, I'd like a cigarette. So we had a cigarette. I'd like a cup of coffee. gave her a cup of coffee. But then she developed a nosebleed, and I couldn't do anything to stop it, and I kept trying to stop it, and interspersed, I was getting really agitated. I mean, I could just feel. And I said, you know, Margaret, these are the choices. You can stay here, I can make you comfortable, and you're gonna die within 2 hours. Are you ready for that? And she couldn't really answer the question. And I said, or I can send you back to the acute care hospital because you need some platelets and that will help you stop bleeding. And maybe you're gonna survive another couple of days. And she'd say, I don't wanna go back to the acute care hospital. And finally I said, have you worked out any details for the care of your children? And she said no, and with that I sent her back to the hospital. Because I personally couldn't let, I mean, this was me personally, I just wasn't ready to let this person I didn't know die. So we arranged to have, she came back the next day and nothing, you know, her red blood cell count was not compatible with life, really. And we arranged a family meeting with her children, all of the social workers, everybody who had ever dealt with this family, and that was a lot of people, to kind of work out the details about the care of her children. And I assumed, and everybody assumed, that she would die within 24 hours. And her mother came up to me at the end of the family meeting and said, you know, Dr. Grace, Margaret's not gonna die. And I sort of looked at her and I said, well, how do you know that? And she said, because I'm gonna give her green tea. And I said, and what does green tea have to do with whether she lives or dies? And she said, I've had cancer 3 times and I drink green tea. So I said, great. And she brought in the green tea, she gave it to Margaret, and Margaret went on to live 1.5 years longer, and every other patient on our ward went on green tea. I'd like to say one word here about sort of the complexity of hospice level care versus intense medical intervention, because this is one of the issues that the AIDS epidemic has pushed, certainly in the United States. The gay male population in San Francisco is incredibly sophisticated, both medically and economically. They know more about their diseases than I ever do and will. They are up on the latest research. They are plugged into the NIH, National Institute of Health, with their mini computers by the bedside, and they can tell me what is happening in Sweden, what's happening in Australia. They know how to use medical care. They know how to use me, and I just put myself at their service, and I say, let me know what you want. Let me know what you want. That's not true of the IV drug abusing population. That's not true of the black population. That's not true of the Hispanic population or even the Asian population. And in part, I think it's because those populations, at least on the mainland, have been very disenfranchised medically. So if I say to somebody, listen, how do you feel about code status? How do you feel about going to the intensive care unit? To limit medical care in any way for them is the same as receiving no medical care. And that's just something to keep in mind. And I think it's a very important part of looking at the multicultural approach to death, that it very much is tied in with medicine and people's access to quality care. Andrew Solomon wrote a really wonderful recent article, which you should read, in the New Yorker on euthanasia. And he raised this question very well. He said, how people die is the least of it. When people die is the question from which religion springs. I'm sorry, why people die is the question from which religion springs. But when people die, that's the question over which we're beginning to have dominion. And that's very heady business. And I certainly see that as a physician. I think I've gotten more and more quiet as the years go on because I realize how much the timing of death is really a question of language. If I go to a family and I say, your son is very ill, your daughter is very ill, do you want me to do everything possible? They'll say yes. If I go to that same family and say, do you want me to let nature take its course? they also will say yes. The outcome is very, very different. So I'm trying to learn, and I'm learning to be careful with language, or else the timing of death ends up resting in my hands. Not the fact of death, but the timing of death. And part of this medical sophistication makes it really difficult for families as well as patients, because I know families will say to me, how long, they'll sort of say quietly out in the hall, how long does my brother, my son have? And I'll say, you know, I really don't know. I can tell you always within 24 to 48 hours of death, but when that 24-hour period is going to come, I have no idea. And again, it's because of this complex interplay between will, spirit, whatever that might be, medical technology, whatever that is in a given moment, and this virus itself. It's very unpredictable. I think what it's made me appreciate, this sort of moment-to-momentness of living and dying, is the whole issue of preparation for death. And I think people need time to prepare to die. They need to decide how to do it in their own way, if not when to do it. And that's what this kind of moment-to-moment interplay gives. Isan Dorsey, I don't know if any of you have read this book called Street Zen, but Isan Dorsey was an IV drug abuser, a gay male. He was a female impersonator. He was also the abbot of Hartford Street Zen Center once he became a Zen monk. And Hartford Street Zen Center in San Francisco started one of the first hospices for AIDS patients in the United States. In any case, shortly before his death, he was infected with the HIV virus. He was interviewed by the New Yorker magazine, and he was sewing on his robes, or actually he was sewing on the robes of the next person who was going to take the mountain seat ceremony to take his place when he died. And the interviewer said, well, so Isan, how are you preparing for your own death? And he said, I'm sitting here, I'm talking to you, and I'm sewing on my robes. But how people prepare for death, in my experience, has a great deal to do with their culture, their attitudes towards death, their own spirituality, their family background, their thinking process generally, and their ability to think, because many of my patients are demented, and so it's quite complex to look at preparation for death. In preparation, my preparation for giving this talk, I asked my lone Japanese gay male patient, what can you tell me about preparing for death in Japan? And it was fascinating because I'd known that when he came to us, he tried to commit suicide. And I'd assumed from the medical record, because he's been seen by every psychiatric service in the city, that he'd been severely depressed, that it had been the result of depression. But as I was talking to him, and this gets back to the earlier conversation this morning, what became really clear was that he tried to commit death because, in his words, commit suicide, because committing suicide in Japan was an honorable way to die, certainly relative to how much honor was not attached to dying of AIDS. And he said, you know, what I've learned in this experience, I tried 3 times to kill myself, to have an honorable death, and I was not successful. And what he said to me is, I'm coming to realize how hard it is to die, and actually I'm getting scared. He actually was getting scared. And I think this is one of those powerful lessons that those of us who work intimately with AIDS patients see, which many people don't see, and that is how difficult it really is to die. And I don't mean the act of dying itself, but Camus said this in The Myth of Sisyphus. The body has its knowledge, the mind has its knowledge. The task of the body, or the message from the body, is it shrinks from annihilation, whereas the mind may be able to let go. And we see this a lot. And I think that it's this physical clinging to life that certainly makes our unit the special place it is. It's very noisy. All people are together. We have children there. We have a pig on our ward. We have many cats on our ward. You know, it's sort of it's a magnet for every wild or semi-wild animal, you know, in the greater San Francisco area because none of the windows close. We actually do have a pig on our ward. And, you know, we have medical rounds for the animals as we do for the patients. And we have children who visit, not who live on the ward. But at one point, you know, we're always having visitors because it's one of these model units, and the noise level is deafening. It's just deafening. And at one point, we're very collective in how we make decisions, but at one point, some of us decided not to be collective. And we decided to try to institute a quiet hour in the afternoon, kind of like we had in school as children, you know, cookies time. And there was an immediate rebellion, just total rebellion. And then I got this idea, how about some nice classical music between the hours of 2 and 3? Poison pen letters, too funereal, they all said. So then I said, okay, you guys decide, you women decide, what kind of music do you want? So now between the hours of 2 and 3, we have reggae bands, mariachi bands, heavy metal, rap music. And again, it's a lot because this population is young. Their average age is 40. Some are between 13 and 20. They're young. They're dying, but they're very much living each moment before they die. And in some ways, their living is their preparation for dying, and that's so clear. We have, and I can't remember the word, it's yakushu. We have yakushu rituals, or like yakushu rituals on our ward. Somebody will say, today I want to have my funeral. You know, and basically what that means is that we stand up and we have a circle of appreciation for that person. We play the music they want. We cook a cake. You know, we really do it. We have a party. They decide who they want to invite. And it's really wonderful. It's a way of them feeling appreciated, feeling accepted. Oh, in one of these cases, we have a number of transvestites or cross-dressing people and who have been tremendously ostracized in our culture. And for one of these pre-death rituals, what this person wanted to do was to have his hair done, so we called the beauty salon. We painted his nails. We found a beautiful dress. And, you know, she paraded down the aisle between the beds, and it was sort of a wonderful wedding ceremony for herself, was how she described it. She died 15 hours after that, but she was able to walk down, and she gave cake to every other patient. So I think we do have rituals. Sometimes they're spontaneous. We had one person on our unit whose name was Cosmic Lady, and she's a very well-known street person in San Francisco. She used to describe herself to anybody who cared to listen as a missionary from intergalactic casting. And as we were walking around in the morning, she would hand out these 3x5 index cards that were beautifully psychedelic, and we'd stand in line for them. And they'd say things like, the rent is up on the planet. She was preparing for death. I think that those of us who work with dying patients are very much part of their preparation for death. And burnout is an issue that strikes everybody, and burnout, unfortunately, really affects the people that we're relating to. And I know at one point when I felt terribly burnt out, I went to Tassajara, which is our monastery at Greenbelt, and I was sitting sesshin. And at that point, you know, at that day 3 to 4, when everything is screeching, for those of you who have ever sat a sesshin, I sort of saw this endless parade of, at that point, maybe 250 people I'd cared for. It was just endless. And my body was kind of racked with pain. I mean, I was really miserable. But I came out of that experience feeling like just as their bodies are clinging to life, it's part of the reality of human existence that we will be touched and touched deeply by their death and by their life. Because if you care for people who are dying, you come to love them. If you love people and they leave, it hurts. And you have to feel the hurt. You have to have the hurt leave your body in order to continue doing this work. Suzuki Roshi, whom I door, the founder of our temple, said at one point, for me, it really is in the just sitting that I continue to do this work, and I know that it's true for the entire staff that I work with. Everybody has some kind of spiritual practice. It doesn't matter what the discipline is, but some way just to learn to be able to sit in the middle of this. Suzuki Roshi said, when we sit in the cross-legged posture, we resume our fundamental activity of creation. When we sit, we are nothing. We do not even realize what we are, we just sit. But when we stand up, we are there. This is the first step in creation. When you are there, everything else is there. When we emerge from nothing, when everything emerges from nothing, we see it all as fresh, new creation. This is non-attachment. And I take this as my antidote to the part of me that clings, because there will always be a part of me that clings. How many of you here are Buddhists? I mean, I don't mean to get you okay. And how many of you have watched somebody die intimately? Okay. As Buddhists, we take vows repeatedly to save all sentient beings. And one of the ways that that's interpreted in my Sangha is that we make a commitment to walk with one another through birth and death. One Saturday, a couple of years ago, I was sitting and having tea, and I got a call from a friend who said, would you be willing to raise a child in need? And I said, well, let me talk to my partner. Let me talk to my partner. And I talked to my partner, and she said, well, let's go meet the baby. This was a newborn. And I kind of rolled my eyes, because you know what newborns look like. I mean, who in their right mind has it in them to say no to a newborn? So the decision was obviously already made. And I said, we may as well check with the community, because if we're going to walk through birth and death with this little person, they're going to be walking with us through birth and death. And 3 days later, totally unprepared, completely flabbergasted, we brought home this tiny, tiny baby that weighed about 4 pounds. Amazed that anybody that life itself would entrust her to our care. She's now 2 years old. She had her second birthday 2 days ago. And the cast of people she's HIV infected, she was drug addicted, but the cast of people who are supporting her life for this party was somewhere over 170. She's completely oblivious to it. She just is living her life. But every now and then I understand that other people see it differently. For other people, she's a tragedy. She was born drug addicted, she was abused, she was sort of disavowed by her parents, she's infected with an HIV virus. None of this was her fault. What's the karma in this? Is there even any reason to speak of karma? Now Sabrina is just a happy kid, and unfortunately I wish the slide projector worked, because that's what you see of her. She's a laughing, smiling kid. And for us who live close to her, who actually change her diapers, help her walk, follow her life breath by breath, that's all it is. She's life. She's life. Someday our hearts may break, but for now it's really changing diapers. There's a wonderful Japanese movie about the tea master Rikyu, and there's one shot in the movie when he's preparing for a formal tea, and he goes through his garden and he cuts down all of the flowers, leaving a single flower for the eye of the guest to focus on while the guest is approaching the tea room. The cut stalks are apparent, so is the flower. What do you see? The AIDS epidemic in many ways has changed how American culture looks at death, because it's the leading cause of death among young men in America, and probably will also be the leading cause of death among young women in America very soon. It used to be acts of violence, and those deaths were often very swift. The death caused by AIDS is relatively long. Most people know for many years that they probably will die. And it's characterized by periods of normalcy, deterioration, return to normal. And there's a lot of choice in it. choice as to how to deal with the disease, choice about when to die, not choice about the fact of death. And it's been very transforming for a number of the people I've worked with, and I'm not trying to just look at the brighter side, but they've said it's something about the time course in which they're living with this experience. They said, you know, it's taking my life, but it's also given me my life. And by that, I take it to mean that they come to appreciate and understand something about seeing that single flower and the beheaded stalks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Grace, for a comfortable and a powerful image of her work in San Francisco. Before we move to open discussion, where for sure somebody's going to ask her, why is there a pig in the ward? We have two respondents. The first is Tsuneyoshi Miyashiro from St. Francis Hospice and a Project Dana volunteer. Tsuneyoshi.
Thank you very much. I wish that Dr. Denman would have stayed a little longer myself. As you can see that I'm a bit nervous this morning. But anyway, thank you all for being here. I have been a Project Dana volunteer for about four years maybe. My last two patients were one with Alzheimer's disease and the other with Parkinson's. But just recently they have been placed in home care. So I have no one to see. But I still continue to go to the person that has Alzheimer's disease to do the yard work. So that keeps me occupied. As far as hospice is concerned, I've been there for 12 years, but I cannot say anything about it because Dr. Aoki has been doing it for 37 years, and he has seen about 700 somewhat patients die. Well, I've seen about a couple of hundred die, but it's been only 12 years, so I have a lot of catch up to do. Dr. Aoki, congratulations. I see him come to hospice now and then, but he walks so fast that I had no time to stop him and chat with him. I guess he's going to the next patient, I guess, when he's so in a hurry. But let me tell you two instances where I have quite remembered what the reactions were with a patient I have seen. I have seen a 2-year-old boy with leukemia, a 9-year-old boy. Some of them are young, not only the elderly that gets cancer. But there was a 34-year-old young girl. She had cancer of the bone, there's metastasized. And she had so much pain that even the painkiller couldn't help her. She would feel the spasm come from the back of her head. She could feel it coming. It goes all the way down to her feet. And she would just stretch and just expect it to come. And she would say, "Oh, wait." That's all she could say, "Oh, wait." There's so much pain. No painkiller could help her. But I was happy to be there because I do reflexology. And I could touch her feet and massage her leg. From the knee down, that's where I massage. And she always waited for me to come. I visited there about 3 or 4 days a week. And she would wait for my arrival. But it was nice to help her. in my way. Sometimes I used to receive a call from the nurse's station that she's asking for me at 11 o'clock in the evening. So a couple of occasions I went to see her and massage her feet. That is one of the lasting memories that I have of a patient like her. She was very brave. She never complained. And about a man I've been seeing recently,